So this is our first virtual roundtable with the IBAC team, which means that we are dealing with a few technical issues, but that's great. That's the way it's supposed to be. We'll be flexible, and this is going to be a great morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you are in the world. All right, let me get rolling with a few housekeeping items and let you know where we're at. So thanks for joining today's webinar. I'm Catherine Helst. I am the IS-BAO Operations Manager, and IBAC and the IS-BAO and IS-BAO programs are the leading providers of international safety standards for business aviation, as you all know. And we're very excited to kick off these IBAC Roundtable sessions. We're going to be focusing on safety topics that are relevant to the global aviation industry. And today, this is, as I said, the very first roundtable hosted by the IS-BAO Progressive Stage 3 leadership team, focusing on operating in the new, not so normal COVID-19 world. I'm sure many of you have started your operations up again, and today we're going to be talking about how this has worked from a larger flight operation to a smaller flight operations, and we will I'm looking forward to your questions. There will be a question and answer session at the end. Before we get started, I just want to run through a few housekeeping items here. Everybody is on mute at this point, and so if you have questions during the presentation, in the GoToWebinar control panel, there is a section for you to write in questions. Please jump in with your questions anytime you want. I will reserve them and we'll cover them all when we get to the end of the presentation. Let's see, and we're going to start today with just a brief program update from the IBAC team. We'll be starting off with Kurt Edwards, IBAC Director General, and Andreas Meyer, the IBAC ICAO liaison, and then we'll have a quick update from Terry Yeomans with the IS-BAO Program Director, and Ben Walsh, our IS-BAO Program Director. So with that, I would like to welcome Kurt and Andy to come up on video. See what happens.
Let's see. Do I need to do anything, Catherine?
There's Andy. You need to click your camera on.
Okay.
In the control panel, there's a little video camera.
Oh, there it is.
And there you are. Kurt, Andy, welcome. All right, I am going to go to our agenda here. You can see I just ran through what we're going to be doing today. And then once we get through the IBAC updates, we'll go to our presentation on operating in the new not so normal COVID-19 world. So with that, I welcome Andy and Kurt, and I will step off the video for a moment and welcome. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon.
Thank you, Catherine, and thanks to everyone who's joining this first virtual roundtable. We've got a lot of people registered and actually participating, so we're really pleased that you're able to join us today. Andy Meyer is joining me with this brief update for you all. He is the director of our office in Montreal, actually co-located in the International Civil Aviation Organization building itself. And that's our primary purpose for existing is to work with the International Civil Aviation Organization in terms of the development and the appropriate agreement of standards that can, by which we operate around the world. Similar to how the national and regional business aviation associations work in their respective capitals. So the place and institution we work most with is at ICAO, and a natural outflow of our work there is to focus on our priority of safety. And IS-BAO and IS-BAO are two of our very central activities. So we're very pleased to have this roundtable today. And once the shows get started again, we look forward to seeing you actually in person at events at the different business aviation shows around the world. What Andy and I wanted to discuss with you today, or share with you today, is a little bit about what is going on at ICAO with regard to returning to normal operations, if you can say that. ICAO back in April established the Council of Aviation Recovery Task Force, or the CART. This had about 18 different country representatives on it, and included industry representatives, and tried to formulate a very high-level guidance document from which states could try to operate and try to get the system flowing again. The problem is that, and the main challenge is that this is a public health crisis that we're facing all around the world, and trying to mesh aviation operation and providing due regard to the needs of the public health system, that's been very challenging. And you as operators those on a daily basis. We just had a committee meeting with our member associations around the world. It's been 17 times, and all of them were talking about the uncertainty of operating right now, mainly due to requirements. One of the things we've done, thanks to the IS-BAO and IS-BAO programs, is sharing best safety practices with ICAO, and we've also been able to share those with the community through the member associations and programs. And a key initiative that related to CART and related to best sharing practices is also a group called CAPSCA. Don't ask me to tell you what the acronym stands for because it's very long and it doesn't actually make sense, but it's a combination of aviation authorities, industry, and public health authorities. And Andy has been our representative in that initiative up in Montreal at ICAO. And he's done a lot of very good work on the behalf of the industry, especially with regard to the concept of public health corridors. So Andy, if I could ask you to talk a little bit about the CAPSCA initiative and how that's affecting or helping business aircraft operators.
Sure. Thank you, Kurt, and good afternoon from the East Coast to everybody. Just to follow up what Kurt has started talking about, the CAPSCA group is a group that consists mainly of medical professionals, doctors, and nurses. But on the other side, also has representation from international organizations, not only related to aviation, but also tourism and humanitarian backgrounds. So it's a group of people that are sitting together and trying to focus on how can we make border crossing and free movement around the globe a reality again. And as I said this morning in another meeting when I briefed people, one of the key elements of this group is that they're focusing on decision making based on scientific evidence. They're trying to look at recommendations that are really based on evidence and not politicized. And that in some sort of a degree makes the group more credible, but also impedes fast progress, because as you can certainly imagine, medical evidence and scientific evidence, especially on the medical side of the pandemic, is changing every day. But the group currently, the main focus of the group currently is to find ways of mitigating the quarantine measures that are existing at the moment, because it's been realized that this is the main impediment to restarting the aviation sector. The different quarantine requirements of countries are just not helping to restart a free movement on a global scale. So the group is looking at measures that could mitigate these quarantine requirements, that be either testing or multi-level protection. It's split. The jury is still split on what's the most effective and most efficient way. But one thing that can be said right now is certainly that the testing is a hopeful avenue and a hopeful path, but there's a lot of work to be done on that, in particular on the availability of testing and also the efficacy of testing and the reliability of testing. That is the current focus of the group, and I know our time is very limited, so I'm just going to briefly touch on other points that the group is discussing. The group is also looking at the best ways for authorities to make available information pertaining to immigration and public health requirements, because this is one thing that has been criticized all around the world, that information is just not readily available and readily be found. So we're looking at, the group is looking at methods and systems to disseminate this, either through existing systems that are very well known in aviation, such as NOTAM systems or distribution of AICs, but also looking at more web-based and more user-friendly scenarios. Another thing is the expansion of the public health corridor concept that maybe many of you have read in the past. So far, it includes ferry flights, cargo flights, and delivery flights. It should now be expanded to include a certain number of passenger flights. We're working on that very hard at the moment. CAPSCA, just to give you an idea, is meeting at least once a week, and we're in constant contact also intersessionally to work and progress this work. Kurt, back to you. This is a really rough around the edges on what CAPSCA is doing.
So we're trying to keep this very brief for you all. We do a lot of technical work at ICAO on panels and committees that are the beginning of the development of standards processes. And I want to point out two things in particular to you all. First is that the fact that you all are participating in IS-BAO and IS-BAO, and you're actually putting in place and implementing safety management systems, that's very important, because so many people at ICAO do not believe that small operators can do that. And so we've been able to bring to them, thanks to you, demonstrated evidence of the fact that small operators can do it, that SMS is indeed scalable. So I want to thank you for that and let you know that what you do does influence the work that we're able to do up at ICAO. The second thing on environment I wanted to share with you is the importance that we're placing right now on educating with regard to the availability and the use of sustainable aviation fuel. It's something that it's just at its beginnings, and it needs to grow fast, much more quickly. But it's something I'd like you all to be watching for, especially the operators and FBOs that handle fuel. It's going to be a critical measure for us in terms of helping us meet long-term goals of reducing our aircraft emissions, which is also really a license to continue operating. If I could recommend you to take a look at some point at our website, we have a new SAF guide up, which provides all kinds of information on its use, its availability, why it's safe. It's just like jet fuel, even though it's using molecules from different sources. But it's something that we really hope to get information to you about, so that you as operators and so that ground handlers and fuel suppliers can also bring this to the industry. And with that, I think we might have gone over just a little bit, Catherine. We're sorry, but we're very pleased to be here with you guys. And I very much want to thank you for joining us. And thanks to the speakers for also presenting today.
Thank you guys, and nope, you did perfect. I've been fielding questions and chats as we go, so everything is great. Thank you so much for your information and for presenting today. I will keep an eye on questions and see if there are any that come up. And if anyone in the audience has questions for Andy or Kurt, feel free to write them in the question section of your control panel. With that, thank you so much, Andy and Kurt, and we will be turning to Terry Yeomans now for the IS-BAO update. Terry, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
you are.
evening.
Awesome. Hi, Terry. Take it away.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I can see there's some very familiar faces on there that had to put up with me just a short while ago for 4 days doing the workshop. So I apologize for listening to me again. But thanks for joining, and at some ridiculous time in the morning, those of you who are out in Asia. So thank you very much for joining today. This day today is going to be really about asking questions really of some of the operators and what their expectations are for particularly reacting to COVID, and what their expectations are of you as the FBO. But this 5 minutes here for me is really to give you an idea on how we're going at the moment and what we're doing with regards to the program in this current situation. So those of you who know, we're doing virtual auditing. That is working very, very well. We have had a significant number of audits done virtually using technology, which has been fantastic. Just so that you know, since the start of this year, the IS-BAO program has processed coming up to 60 audits. Despite the current pandemic. So we really appreciate the fact that people are still saying very supportive of the program and see that there's value into it, and that the virtual auditing process is working very, very well and allowing the FBOs to pretty much carry on as much as normal can be, but also allowing the auditors their opportunities to assist with that process as well. Virtual workshops, we switched over to those just after the 1st of July, so we've now done 2 virtual workshops. They have been very, very well attended, so thank you to everybody that's been taking part in those. The next one is going to be held in the 3rd week of October. Virtually, we're running them at the same time to try and cover the wide range, again, just like today, of time zones that we have to cover. So we really appreciate your flexibility with the timings in that. So it works well with the fundamentals. The usual one-day workshop is been held over 2 days, 4-hour sessions each, and the same for the auditing workshop, 2 days, 4 hours each for that. We did put out very, very early on at the start of the pandemic a towards COVID-19 secure resource document to help you out. That's pulling in data from a lot of sources, and it also gives you some good information as to where to look for resources with regards to what you can do. And I know our partners at NATA are also helping with the COVID-19 coverage as well. In terms of the program itself, 236 currently have passed stage 1 globally since the program started. We're now at around about 117 that have met stage 2, and just the 3 locations at stage 3 globally. In terms of global reach and how we're performing in this program with regards to the IS-BAO program, we're ahead of where they were at this stage into the program. But you know, we really do need your support to continue this going forward. It's a voluntary program, and the fact that 236 locations have stood up without any legal regulatory requirement to do so and said we want to do something is just fantastic. So we really, really do appreciate that. And in terms of going forward, as Kurt just mentioned and Andy just mentioned, the work at ICAO continues. It's at a slower pace, but it does continue. And next week, we have the next meeting of the ICAO Ground Handling Task Force, which is now moving towards looking at possible standards and recommended practices with regards to ground handling and how we can go forward with that. So we're working, and we are very heavily involved with that work alongside a lot of other industry partners in relation to that work there at ICAO at an international level. From a European perspective, that work is actually going on hold at the moment. We've had a number of meetings this year, and due to the COVID situation, a lot of the staff within EASA have been redeployed to look at COVID resolution. But we will continue. The work at ICAO involves a lot of those who are in the EASA group, and we will continue to pursue the European regulatory front as well. So lots of work to be doing both internationally and regionally, and we do really, really appreciate your support. I think everybody from the ground handling side that's on this call, please listen, please feel free to answer questions of the operators that are going to be doing the presentations here. It is much, much appreciated. And for those of you who are operators here, please support those IS-BAO registered locations. Please seek them out. They are doing something which at no cost to you is actually going to help your safety management. So please seek out those IS-BAO registered locations. 236 globally, look them out, stick them on your list of preferred suppliers, and support the organizations that are supporting your safety management as much as you're trying to do within your organizations. That's my 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. That was perfect. I appreciate your timing and your thoroughness, and I am going to turn this over to Ben Walsh, who will give us the IS-BAO update. Hi, Ben, and it's all yours.
Hi, Thank you again, everyone, for doing this around the world in the various locations. It's truly an international program, and I'm humbled by all the efforts that each and every one of you do to go above and beyond. You're pursuing excellence and always doing more to perfect and reduce your risk in your organization. Again, the IS-BAO and the IS-BAO have a common core, equal partners in safety, so relying on vendors in the various sectors that are complying with the conforming to IBAC standards is a great assist to them and to you. It's a mutual win-win. So do support the IS-BAO and IS-BAO operators mutually. Overall, I just want to give you some basic program updates, and I'll start strategic and go tactical into the workshop topics for today. Registrations have been proceeding very well. We have had hundreds of those in spite of the COVID impact. Virtual auditing, of course, many have opted to do that. We started doing that in March of 2020, where we've exceeded 40 virtual audits to date. As an assist, depending on the situation, there have been some live audits as well. Depends on what part of the world you are and what works for your organization and your culture and your auditor. Several new program advances here that have been developed by the operators. This program, of course, exists for you, the operator. That's why we're here. Starting several years ago with our Vision 2020, we had several focus groups from the small operator, one aircraft, one base, 2 or 3 people, to the large advanced operators with significant safety systems. Working on 2 different programs, both the Flight Plan Stage 1 and the Progressive Stage 3. Some of the benefits of those, which you'll see much more through the months and years ahead, but some of the takeaways for today is this, in fact, workshop. Both speakers or panelists are from one side or the other, Flight Plan Stage 1 and the Progressive Stage 3. One thing I wanted to recognize is that we have a significant tenure of experience in our community. We're proud of the time that people have supported this program, whether it be in your organization as an operator or as a long-term auditor. You can see on the slide there, we have many 10 and 15-year recognition opportunities coming up. We want to point that out today, and we've elected to give a special event to that opportunity to spend more time to praise and credit those that have done so much for the program over the years. So for those operators and auditors, you can look forward to that. We don't have the typical base events to do so and socialize, but we're going to create a unique way to do that here via the COVID type situation we're dealing with today. I'd like to select the slide forward, please. So I wanted to point out the part of the elements of why we're doing what we're doing. And it will be, we have the classic program that we always had, Stage 1, 2, and 3. And due to the interest of the industry, we have developed the progressive programs with a Flight Plan Stage 1. Of course, there will be a Flight Plan Stage 2 and 3 for the small operator. We have several focus groups working on that now. And then continued outputs from the Progressive Stage 3. The idea that ties it together, of course, is a standardization to the audit and to the protocols. And so part of the benefits has been the group of progressive auditors that we invited into the program. I wanted to mention them here now. In North America, Amanda Ferrara, Ava Shabat, Dan Kirkran, Jay Treat, Kyle Keffrey, Rob Little, and then of course in the Europe and Middle East, we have Andre Richter, Kareem, Michael Vihoff, Claudio, and Nancy Hammer. And we've put these auditors through a unique training course, which will benefit our overall auditors in the future with our new revamp coming with the workshop complete overhaul from the traditional fundamentals and auditing into an initial and recurrent, similar to how we deal with training in the flight training environment today. But the standardization effort has been a 50-hour course. It's been unique in its depth. It allows a specialized auditor to be able to do some of these programs where we're leveraging efficiencies and standardization to benefit the operator. You can look forward to that as being part of the progressive programs and also many of the benefits trickling into the other classic programs as well. So I want to thank this group. They've been with us for some time. They put a lot of energy and effort into working through this with the teams at IBAC. Next slide, please. And it wouldn't happen without the operators. So I really want to extend a great amount of gratitude to the original beta group operators. We had a focus group that led to this. They came out of our focus group many years ago. And these operators, listing them with their names or personal names, have been benefited the entire program in the industry based on how do we remain true to the program. We adapt to technology, efficiencies, and improvements for the advanced safety system, so the IS-BAO comes to you versus you as the operator coming to the IS-BAO. When you've implemented the full just safety culture at the level that these operators have, we work together for a tailored experience that focuses on your risk reduction goals, on your timelines, and it benefits the collaborative with the technology that we can put towards data collection, roundtables like today, and other benefits. So the list there is some have moved on in various positions at their companies, and some are still involved, but it wouldn't happen without these people. And I'm grateful for the beta operators, and you'll see some more benefits as we roll this out later this year publicly. With that, I would not like to delay us from getting into the meat and potatoes of what we're here to do today. So I'd like to give it back to Catherine and bring on the panelists for today. Bring on Gary and David. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Ben. And again, any questions that you have, feel free to write them in the question block and we'll get to them in just a moment. And so without further ado, I think I saw Kate pop up on camera at some point here. So hopefully her camera, there she is. Oh, awesome, perfect. All right, so we're gonna turn to the topic at hand, operating in the new, not so normal COVID-19 world. Our presenters here today, as Ben mentioned, are involved in the progressive programs. We have Gary Dietz, who is the chief pilot of a Fortune 100 flight operation and has been on the IS-BAO PS3 leadership team. Kate Beaton, who is the manager of passenger services and senior flight attendant with the Fortune 100 flight company. And David Keys, Peace River Citrus Products. He's the chief pilot, and he is also the chairman of the NBAA Small Flight Department Committee. So we have a broad range of experience and stories to tell you today. We also, David introduced us yesterday to Covey, the comfort bear. I just wanted you all to know that Covey is doing it right and helping all of us do it right. So I hand it off to you guys. I'm so excited to hear what you have to say, and I'll see you in a little bit.
All right, thanks, Kate, and thank you to IBAC for putting this together. We all know we're operating in a different time. I mean, when we started 2020, we had different focuses, different concerns, and just like what we've had to do in this industry from day one, we have to adapt. We have to change. We see that going on in the IS-BAO program, in the IS-BAO program. It truly is. Both programs are operating in a world of continuous improvement. And what the three of us hope to share here today is some of our successes, some of our failures. We have them both, and we're just going to have a conversation amongst the three of us, and hopefully that'll generate some questions that you can submit. But again, we all know we're operating different today than we did at the beginning of 2020. Every destination, whether or not if it's domestic or international, have different mandates, different rules. Services may change, and you may incur changes on a daily basis. Now, a term that has been in the industry for a long time, know before you go, is kind of making a comeback. The more we know, the better the success that we have, not just for our passenger comfort and for their experience, but also their concerns about having a safe trip. And so David will give a viewpoint from a smaller operator. Obviously, we have a couple more aircraft than what David has. I fly with Kate, and she'll give us perspective and experiences of what she's seen in the cabin. And we're basically going to have a conversation focusing on three key things. regardless of what we do and the decision we make, we should always take care of our people, take care of our passengers, and take care of our company. There's many correct ways to go from A to B. There's many correct ways of implementing programs. We all have our input. We all have our best practices or what might be best for us. And those that know me, they've heard me say this before, programs come and go. Programs adapt, they have to change to the changing environment, but the principle should never change. And that is, we need to be safe. And in this day and age, it's not just our landings equal our takeoffs. It's how do we provide the safety and comfort of our cabin and our operation while we're operating during a pandemic. Again, we don't have all the answers. We're probably going to learn from you as much as you learn from us. If not, we'll probably learn more. And hope, again, it goes back to the questions that you submit. So that's kind of our opening. David, Kate, anything you want to add to the opening? And then we'll jump right in. Anything else you want to add? David?
No, I think you covered it well. And of course, we are approaching it from two different perspectives. But what we've learned in our conversations is what applies to a larger department a lot of times applies to a smaller department. It's just how we affect it. And that's the challenge. And we're going to talk about that as we go ahead.
And Kate, the value of having a cabin, somebody that works in the cabin in this conversation, David and I, our eyes are forward. And to have Kate's perception of what's going on in perspective, it's important as well. Kate, what would you like to add to the opening?
Yeah, I think you addressed this well, opened this up well. Just remember that we're still focusing on the same thing as we were before. It's safety. We've just had to adapt and ultimately enhance our safety routine to accommodate this virus. So that's sort of what we'll be touching on today.
Okay. So again, the value of having not only this webinar, but in our industry, all of us know and understand the value of networking. We learn from each other. We share our successes and our failures. And in the process of doing so, we truly operate in an environment of continuous improvement. You'll hear me say that a lot, continuous improvement. It doesn't stop. We're always adapting and changing. So each of us may have a different answer. I propose this. Those of us that were operating for principals or companies, if we were a valuable resource prior to, I propose that we will continue to be a valuable resource during and after the pandemic. Nobody knows when it will be over. We're just going to learn to adapt during that process. And so again, we're not talking about landings and takeoffs. That equation should, 1 + 1 should always equal out. What we're talking about is maximizing our assets to minimize the exposure of COVID. Kate and David, even with the minimal trips that we have had, what have you observed as far as the concern or lack of concern when it comes to us, to our passengers? David, what about you? What has been your overall experience?
Yeah, and I think it definitely concerned. We're in a unique situation where our principal has health issues, so we're on heightened alert when it comes to who we put on the airplane that may be going to meet with them, and we try and gain all the information we can, and we have to become the experts that the passengers are relying on, and that's been a difficult task because that's added to everything else we're trying to do in a small flight department. Not having the resources to dig into best practices, sometimes you just simply have to go with maybe your gut instinct or the safest of what you think is going to work, and masks or hand washing and sanitizing and cleaning the airplane. It's added a whole level of tasks that we aren't used to in a small flight department. So it's stretching us even a little bit more from the front to the back.
Okay, I'd like to get back to that comment too about stretching you. And yes, I'll set the question up. Do you sacrifice your fatigue management to take care of these added items that we need to take care of. So I'll get back to you in a second on that. So Kate, again, the value of your perspective of being in the cabin. What has been your experience in the cabin as far as heightened concerns or no care at all?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And really what I've experienced, we have a wider variety of passengers on our aircraft. Everyone has their own comfort level, which adds a difficult for us to have one plan that works for everyone. That being said, everyone has been extremely respectful to the potential seriousness of the virus. Some different comfort levels that I'm talking about there are passengers choosing to wear their masks while seated in the cabin, changes to catering requests, which we'll talk a little bit more later on, and down to passenger luggage and handling their cars or any of their items. So it's been challenging to read your passengers and adapt to their needs. I think it's really important that we as crew members remember that each individual passenger has their own concerns when it comes to handling the virus. So we do need to take care of our passengers and adapt to ensure that their concerns are properly addressed and make them feel comfortable on the aircraft traveling with us.
Right, and one question I want to ask you right now too is, have you seen a difference in how flight crews may approach? Do you see a different level of concern there as well?
Absolutely, it's definitely added a new layer to coming to work. You know, we do know what we're facing leaving our house and going about our day. So, but we'll talk about this in more detail later, but creating guidelines so that everyone is on the same team has helped alleviate a lot of that stress. And that's what we'll touch on this today while we're speaking, but I can say that's definitely helped everyone approach coming into work environment where there is an elephant in the room. We do know that everyone has their own comfort levels, but guidelines help everyone be on the same page, and at least we know what we are coming into when we come to work, what to expect.
All right, thank you. David, getting back to the question about particularly fatigue management, and what I'd like to point out to the entire audience, David, you know, you and I haven't personally met very many times, but we still have the same goal. Our landings equal our takeoffs, okay? I may have a few more resources in our department. You may have limited resources, but our landings equal our takeoffs. And so you mentioned, you know, added layers to what you're already doing. Let's take a pause from the discussion here for just a minute and discuss fatigue management. Do you sacrifice fatigue period?
I think the answer is yes and no when I think about it. Yes, in that the added layer adds stress to what we're doing. And so if we're flying back to back trips, the stress that creates fatigue is, what else have I forgotten? I've focused, we had a trip to the Bahamas and I spent a week trying to figure out what I needed for a crew to pick up in the Bahamas, and every time I checked, I got a different answer. And so the stress came with, at the day of the trip, like, oh, what else have I forgot? Or what have we as a team forgot to do in our normal flight preparation, transportation preparation, catering preparation, all of those issues. And so, but by the end of that trip, I did feel more fatigued because it was just mentally straining, adding that layer on top. And so, you know, when we'll talk about it, we've created a checklist tool to help lower that stress so that we're not, because I think stress and fatigue come in different ways, and I'm not spending more hours awake on the flight, but I'm spending more energy in processing it. So it does add to it. I mean, I know at the end of that trip, I was fatigued.
It does. And we need to recognize that. And again, good open communication and transparency amongst our crews, amongst the flight deck. We just need to maintain a higher level of awareness of what's going on around us and what everybody is doing. So when we knew COVID was going to be a major disruptor to our operation, right away, we created a team of individuals within our department. Again, the scale of our operation might be a little different than a smaller organization, but I truly believe the end result can be the same. And what we did, we created a team of individuals. David, you mentioned a checklist. So what did you do? And then I'll get into what we did.
Sure. We sat down as part of my work with MBAA. We as a committee, we tried to come up with, and it helped my operation, basically a COVID pre-departure checklist that we could run through and make sure we're asking the right questions of the FBOs, the airports. One of the issues that I ran across, we just this last 2 weeks, we went into 2 airports that had no services. There was nobody. So it's like, okay, how do I handle that? What is somebody's meeting? There's nobody from the airport there. It's all of a sudden we had people driving up to our airplane. It's like, okay, this isn't on our checklist, and I don't even know how to prep for that. How do we handle this? And so while the checklist is helping lower that fatigue, it still doesn't answer all the day-to-day operational problems that we face as we go forward.
Exactly. And so again, if I may, what I heard you say, here's what we did well, here's what we need to do better, here's our lessons learned, and here's what we can do better. Kate and I will share some of our experiences as far as what we did in our department. So going back to the team that I mentioned, we have a line service supervisor on the team, a line flight attendant, a line pilot, and a line maintenance engineer, and a line non-management scheduler. The point I want to make is this team is not comprised of management individuals. We needed feedback. And as we say, feedback is a gift as long as it's done respectful and through the right channels. But each one and everybody from every organization within our group, within our flight department, had a voice where they could share their concerns. They could give their input on expectations that we laid out. So what this team started creating was basic, and it's grown to about a 3 to 4 page document of several bullet points of do's and don'ts on how each one of these separate areas within our department needs to operate, some general guidelines, but majority of it, and there's 32 bullet points on there for Kate and I to follow, in addition to our FOM and our SOP. So David, you talk about added layers or added stress. It's like, there's additional things that the chief pilot is asking me to do. Again, we have, I would add too, we have pre-departure briefings. We expanded those to where we have maintenance. Every one of those groups participate in the pre-departure briefing to where we share the information. It goes back to earlier what I said, know before you go. So Kate, what has been your experiences with our detailed plan of action? That's what we call it. And with the pre-departure briefings, how have they been helpful and how?
Yeah, so short answer is extremely helpful. I believe the success behind our team, though, is truly the fact that it's made up of such a diverse team. The team has a voice from each department and adequate representation and perspective of what the department needs as a whole to get through each trip that we have planned. And there's not too many voices involved as well. There's a fine line of you want perspective, but you also want to stay on task and be productive. So it's having one representative from each department is very effective or very efficient. We have to remember that COVID safety doesn't just affect the flight crew. It's important that each department has expectations, but also that those expectations are shared across the entire operation so that everyone can help everyone succeed and meet their guidelines. Some examples of this is In our operation, we have line service, and we all know they can interact quite closely with passengers, their luggage, and sometimes even their cars. They can be involved in a very important aspect of this process as well, which is cleaning and disinfecting the aircraft. So having guidelines set for them and sharing that with the team sets them up for success as well. Maintenance has direct contact with the flight crew as well as the aircraft. They often work together as a team while at work, so putting guidelines in place to minimize their exposure while working is important as well. And schedulers, as we mentioned before, they typically don't have as much contact directly with flight crew and passengers, but they can become a huge asset to the team. As David mentioned, being stretched thin, if they can help out gathering information on the side, that can be massive. But they need to know what we need to know as flight crew to help us succeed with that. City mandates are changing daily, sometimes hourly. So having some help on the side to help us gather that and have someone sort of putting a little more effort into that or on their checklist can really, really help the team succeed, and then ultimately have a successful plan of action take place.
All right, well, I appreciate both your comments. So let's talk a little more about experiences. And again, focusing on the facts, not the fault. As in any true safety culture, that's what we need to do. We learn from our successes and failures. We go back and during the debriefings, what went well, what can we do better, and we document it. We update or clarify or list new expectations. So in our briefing, pre-departure briefing, it's a one-page document with about, I guess, around 28 areas that we cover. From the mandates, each airport, each city has different mandates, as Kate mentioned. There's different mandates for that an FBO may have versus what the expectations is on the crew. Different guidelines if you're out on the ramp versus the lobby. It changes from airport to airport. How do we handle ground transportation for the crew and our passengers? And so these things that we learned from our experiences that we need to cover these in the pre-departure briefing. We need to call ahead and be specific with questions instead of just asking, are you open? And David, I'd like you to share that story that you had about ground transportation on one of your trips. It's ideal.
Right. We're fortunate in our department. We visit a lot of the same places, so we build relationships. And we had 3 rental cars that the passengers used. They had brought them on the ramp before we got there. The next day, typically they bring the cars. What we've always done: drive the cars up to the airplane. We load them up, close the door. They take the cars away. So we closed the door, and I was sitting there and look, and the cars are still sitting there. I'm like, okay. So we got up out of the seat, opened the door, and the line guy goes, "We can't touch the cars. You need to have your people move out to the parking lot so that the rental car company can come and pick them up." So it delayed our departure, but we didn't know to ask the question, and they didn't know to tell us. So we went back in there a week later, and we knew what to do. So I just briefed the passengers, "Hey, when you unload the bags, just take the car back out to the parking lot and leave the keys at the counter." And but it was an example of something happening and not knowing to ask the question, but then briefing it and putting it into the process.
Exactly, and we experienced similar items like that as well. And Kate, I'll get to you in a second here about catering, but the thing that just crossed my mind is we have people listening and observing our webinar throughout the world. And we're just talking about a domestic flight within the 48 states. But sometimes with the differences at each one of our destinations, it's almost like we're crossing numerous boundaries and every destination is different. We call ahead and ask the local handler, what's going on? What do you need from us? Here's what we need from you. It's just on a different scale. I see it applying to international operations. I I don't see this going away. The process by which how we coordinate some of our trip needs is going to go away anytime soon. So again, knowing before we go and interjecting our lessons learned from previous trips into the right checklist and the right discussions with our handlers or international service provider or the FBOs. So Kate, what have you experienced in the cabin when pre-COVID versus what you're experiencing now, from service to catering, how you interact? The time is yours. Share with us your experience.
Thanks, Gary. The biggest advice that I can start off with is, as flight crew and, as pilots and flight attendants, just leaving ourselves a little bit of extra time. There are still surprises that are coming up. So if we can give ourselves that extra time to breathe, learn, take it in, and adapt, that's huge. We can handle everything that comes our way, but time is sometimes not of the essence for us. So we need to just leave that extra time. And really, in the cabin, the largest changes that we've adapted to is the types of services we do. We've really tried to avoid any contact with food, and it's taken some time, especially as flight attendants. We're used to adding our creativity to our dishes, and that's kind of a thing we like to do. So adapting to a box lunch style, it's very doable, and you can still be creative, but it is putting us to the test of figuring out how much can fit in a box. Reaching out to your catering provider. Now we need that extra layer of communication, because what we envision in our heads is not necessarily what they have available to them. Items that we removed within the cabin are fruit baskets. That was kind of an open touched area, so we've pulled back from that. We continue to carry fruit, but now it's more of an on-demand, and we can properly wash, disinfect the fruit before bringing it to the passenger. We've also done a nut service, a warm nut service at the beginning of the flight, which did involve an open cup of nuts that were put in the oven and brought out. So we've adapted to that, which is something our passengers enjoyed having, and just offering packaged nuts before, just one more layer of avoiding contamination. Catering, we touched on a little there. It's important now more than ever to just reach out to your caterer. Find credible caterers that you trust, that you know, and that you can communicate well with. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask them what they're doing to take their measures above and beyond with COVID. It's good to check in, challenge them, and that way you can trust what's delivered and take care of your passengers. I think the biggest change for us is the box lunch style. That's become quite popular. Don't veer off of continuing to add your creativity to it, and give it a try, and just send feedback to your colleagues. We all work together on, and there's some pretty creative stuff you can do out there. So it's just adapting, which is what we were born to do and why we do this. So you can absolutely do it, but just don't be afraid to think outside the box.
So, Kate, can I ask you, as many small operators do not, I was going to have her just expand just a little bit. Many small operators do not have a flight attendant. Are there specific questions that or information you want from the caterer that we should be asking that I don't know to ask right now?
Absolutely, that's a great question. So as I mentioned before, just asking them straight up of what are their measures taking place since COVID. The CDC doesn't have specific guidelines, or there is no specific guideline for it, but we know what's right and wrong. We know what we want to hear. So just them saying, yes, we do, and answering right away, that can be enough to show that they have considered it, they have changed. When it comes to ordering, the biggest the biggest challenge I've had is actually asking what size packaging they have and what they're to get a hold of. A lot of items right now are backlog. Items that you're used to your caterers having may not be the same anymore. So simply asking the dimensions of to-go or closed containers is a great place to start. That way you can start to envision what's going to come. The biggest challenge I find is using caterers that you're not used to, or changes with your caterers that you are used to, is when items arrive and your mind kind of envisioned it coming one way and it's not that. And again, if we have time, we can adapt, but we don't always have time. We don't, and especially without a flight attendant, you know, that's more challenging for you guys. You're not spending 30 minutes preparing your catering and reboxing everything. So the more you can communicate and be more clear and colorful to your caterer, the more they can understand your vision, and that way it arrives closer to what you envisioned and how you perceive allotting your time and your service out to your passengers.
Oh, good stuff.
If Catherine, if you could advance the slides for us, that would be great. One more. Okay, we'll hold it. We'll hold it right there. So,
Sorry,
David.
sorry, there. I think
No.
this was the one you were looking for. Yes, or
Yeah,
the next one.
No, this is fine. This is perfect. So, David, what has been your experience with catering as well? Because the other day when we were discussing this with Kate, I mean, you jumped on that right away, saying, "Man, Kate, I got to talk more about you." What? Again, we're focusing on the facts, David, not the faults. I mean,
Right.
We're pilots, okay? And Kate, I'm going to come back to you more about crew catering, so don't go away. So, David, what's been your experience?
Right. Well, I asked Kate just the simple question of whether to use a plastic silverware or the onboard dinnerware, and you had a really good point about that. I thought that I hadn't even realized. If you want to unfold that for us.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's cover that. So, Kate, what? China?
Yeah,
silverware versus plastic.
Yeah, absolutely. If you do have passengers that are requesting sort of a no-touch style, so indicating to they don't want you to plate their meal, typically is what that means. You do come up with, do we order plastic cutlery packs that are, you know, absolutely no touch anymore? But now the passengers have to eat with plastic cutlery, which can be quite annoying, as we all know, and something we're not used to as well. The approach that we took at our company was that because of our guidelines that we've set up, and because I have confidence in our crew, our operation, I know that our cutlery, our china, and I'm sorry, not china, our silverware has been properly disinfected. We cleaned it in a dishwasher, and it has been brought back on the aircraft in a safe manner as well. And I know that I will disinfect it before I use it if it looks to not be that way at all. And I'll also wear gloves when I roll them up or place them. So I control a lot when I set it up and choose to use our silverware ourselves. I know our operation, and I know that we've taken the steps to do that safely. So we choose to use silverware because we can control that, and I trust our operation to do so safely. Remember that when we're adapting to their needs, but it doesn't have to go completely out of we can continue to use our creativity and trust ourselves in our operation and how we do things safely. So for us, it was safe. We deemed it safe to use silverware, continue to use silverware, and that wearing gloves in a controlled environment allowed us to safely roll it up or place it out for the passengers.
Excellent.
Okay.
One of the things
Kate,
I think about. Oh, go ahead. And you don't, because you're a flight attendant. We cut back on our snack drawer items because the passengers get up and dig through the snack drawer, and you don't know who's been through it, who's not been through it, who may have contaminated, who may not contaminate. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
No, absolutely. We do have certain aircraft that do have a drawer in the cabin. We have others that, thankfully, in this case, they are in the galley, so we can control that a little better. We have adapted to that. We do actually have a box now that we bring on board that we can control what comes in and out of it, and just one less hand touching it as well. It's going to come down to your passenger level and what you guys decide, but that's a great point. It's more things to think about that need cleaning, proper cleaning afterwards. You know, our passengers touch the aircraft. That's fine, but we also predict where they touch, and we clean everything that we think they've touched. So adding that into your checklist for cleaning may be something you want to consider. Or if there is a way for you to control that snack drawer, I know without a flight attendant it becomes more difficult, but it may be better something as simple as removing the snack drawer options and putting them in a basket, and that basket can be removed and brought on every flight.
Good point. Yeah, I like that. Sorry, Gary.
No, great question. Again, this is an open conversation between the three of us, and I hope we're generating some additional questions, but and people probably want to know more. So Kate, let's talk about, have you done anything different with when you're taking care of the flight crews in flight? Anything different compared to the passengers, or same service, same level? What are you doing different there?
The approach that we've decided to take is the level that the passengers have requested. So if the passengers have requested box lunch or a no-touch style, we treat the pilots the same way. That way it's set the tone for the aircraft. The passengers, whatever they see, they know that we're also treating them the same way. And I know a lot of pilots are used to having that box lunch style, right? It's something that we regularly order. So I don't think it's been a huge change for the pilots, but it's definitely a change for me to not plate my pilots' meals, or to not put a little more effort into creativeness in their meals. But what I found, and I think our entire department can agree on, is keeping one tone on the aircraft from the front of the flight deck to the passengers or the cabin is a really good way to go. Again, there's no perfect way to do it, but it just sets the tone. If the passengers see you plating the pilots' meals, they may question if you plated theirs or if you touched theirs, right? It's become a no-touch meal service, so we do it across the board. So it just sets a tone. You don't forget. You're not crossing over between services either.
Okay, and David, this question, jump in after Kate answers this next question. Kate, explain to the folks, how do we handle mask during the pre-trip, during the trip, post-trip? What do we do? What guidance do we have for the crews with our masks?
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great question, and it definitely took our department I would say at least a month to kind of figure that one out, and that was based on feedback and asking what worked and what didn't. It's a weird subject, right? Pilots wearing masks doesn't make sense in the cockpit, and we went back and forth on what's the safest, and that's what we're always trying to. So we've decided that if you are in the cockpit operating the aircraft, you may remove your mask. And as soon as you leave the cockpit area, you will put them back on. And anytime you're in the galley or in the cabin, that's expected of all the crew. So me as a flight attendant, I'm essentially wearing my mask the entire flight. It does add, I would be lying if I said it didn't add some difficulty into my day or changes to my day. But again, we adapt and we each other things that work. The biggest change for me as a flight attendant is in the cabin. While the engines are running, you're in the air, we forget that now we have this, and it's a lot harder to understand me. So it's loud in the cabin. Just take that time to enunciate a little more. Perhaps getting down to your passenger's level can help, especially if they do have any hearing impairments at all. Just be a little more patient with that, and do take the time to slow down and pronunciate a little more, or getting down to the level is usually the most efficient. For pilots, especially if you guys don't have a flight attendant and you're not as used to coming back, do be aware of that the mask does impede what they can hear. And safety-wise, think of that as well. If I had to tell the passenger to do something quickly, it may be worth me removing my mask to make sure that I'm heard clearly, because that might be more important than the mask at that point. So evaluating your safety levels there.
So David, in your operation, is there a difference between the flight deck and the cabin as far as masks or guidelines?
No, in that we're a small company. We have some senior management people that are anti-mask. That is their stance. So they're going to they'll wear one if required coming through an FBO, but once they get on the ramp or to the airplane, they remove it. And they do a lot of business in the bathroom. So they typically remove their mask once the door is closed, and we do also up front. And so we'll operate the flight, no mask, and then once we land, we'll put our mask back on to handle the FBO, get them gone, and then do whatever the local law is to wear the mask until we're in a car or gone from the airplane. So I think it's a little different because we don't have the big corporate policy. We're a small management team, and they're all individuals. They've been with the company for 30, 40 years. So they each have kind of their own view. But we do have some that are pro diehard masks, and they will wear it. You see some of the pictures even when we're flying. So we have to adjust to that dynamic, and depending on who's on board the airplane and what their desire is.
Again, like we pointed out at the very beginning of our discussion, there's a lot of ways to go from A to B. There's a lot of programs that we can implement. Again, the value of having open discussions within any flight department, within any group, setting expectations where we need to, so we don't self-interpret, especially when you get into larger organizations. You need a center line to keep folks in line. And you list out the expectations, and you brief them, go through the debriefing. Again, like I mentioned before, feedback is a gift as long as it's done respectfully and through the right channel. And we continue to ask, what are we doing well? What can we do better? Talking a little more about the subject of mask, and Kate, I know I'm setting up the question here. Do we carry N95 masks, and what do we do with them?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So that was something we very immediately discussed across the flight department, is do we have them and can we access them? Especially at the beginning of COVID, you couldn't go and just buy 20 masks and throw them on your aircraft. It was very difficult to get them, and still can be. So we did indeed do our research, and our first aid kits from MedAir, they do have N95 masks. And so that's great. Now we know we have them, but how do we use them? That's just the beginning of the battle there, right? So we discuss best practices. We use our resources to find out what guidelines are being put in place. And what we decided in our department was, if a passenger or crew member showed signs of COVID or some illness that we were fearful of spreading, that we would separate the passenger or crew member the best as possible based on your cabin configuration. And we would put the N95 mask on that passenger. We did carry enough masks for everyone on board, just a simple surgical mask, so everyone can wear a mask, but as we know, that won't protect us from the spread the same that the N95 masks do. So we've chosen to place it on the person that is showing signs and symptoms, separate them, and be aware of items they may have touched or disinfected. We can still, as we know, this virus, we're learning about it every day. It's very infectious, so we need to do everything we can to avoid the spread in the environment we're in. I would challenge anyone who isn't sure what's inside of their MedAir or first aid kits, wherever you resource them from, do look inside and see what's in there. There's a lot of items in there, and reaching out to your provider for your first aid kits, they'll also be able to help you if it's not on the outside of your first aid kit.
And David, that's something we talked about the other day when we're just kind of having our conversation, laying out this discussion is, and again, what you said earlier, about 30 minutes ago, another layer. You know, okay, not only am I supposed to know what's in the FOM, the SOPs, my departure NOTAMs, my destination NOTAMs, now what, we know where the first aid kit is. We make some assumptions that, yeah, it's a first aid kit, I'll use it if I need it. Right. But now here's one more scenario. And going back, you said it perfectly, just another layer or another item that we got to worry about. What do we have, and are we properly trained on it?
Right.
So,
right. And then that was a really good point that Kate made on our conversation the other day, because it never dawned on me to look in our MedAir kit to see what is in there. Because as a small operator, we're almost hesitant to open it because it's sealed, and every year we send it off and get it certified, and it costs money, and it just sits there. And no, we may actually need to look and see what's in there. Really good point, and that's something we're going to do. And the layers are subtle too. I think that's what I think. If it was a layer, I always said it's more stressful. The unknown is more stressful than the known. Give me a known and I'll figure a way around it. It's the unknown that makes it so stressful. And that's what we're dealing with. How to clean the airplane. I mean, we're still struggling with that concept. And who do we use? How does that work? How often do we do it? Do we do it after every trip? If we do, what do the pilots use to clean it? It's approved by Cessna or approved by the manufacturer. It adds a whole level of stress.
Mhm.
It does. And I mean, we could talk for several hours about our detailed plan of action and go back and forth, David, between companies that have several resources versus, excuse me, a smaller operation that you have limited resources. But again, your objective is the same thing. You have additional worries, different layers, and it adds to fatigue. It adds to, it just builds up, builds and builds. And so we have to manage that. And the more that we can document and share stories, share experiences, we create consistency. And as we in order to create consistency, we continually outline and detail our expectations. We have open conversations, again, focusing on the facts, not the fault. It really falls into play with IS-BAO and IS-BAO. What's best for our operation based upon the resources that we have, the budget, local mandates, all these things come into play. So again, a detailed plan should, excuse me if I look down here and I want to make sure that I list everything that we have, a detailed plan, and I submit this for a proposal. People can add to it or take away from it. A good detailed plan should have practicing good hygiene by everybody. Some folks need to be reminded, I'm sorry to say that, but it should cover how do we communicate and coordinate with line service, maintenance, our facilities, the pilots and flight attendants interactions, or if it's a two pilot only flight crew, administration, all the employees that are around our aircraft, the supplies we receive, how do we communicate? And as we do this, and I also would submit that as we clarify the expectations and our passengers see consistency, it just reassures them to a new comfort level, not only the value that we bring, but it enhances that and lets them know that we're doing the best we can to operate in a safe environment. One thing that comes to my mind is, do you know where the outflow valves are? Do you brief is the entire flight crew, meaning the flight attendants, are they aware of what an outflow valve is? Why is it there? And how does that play into this discussion if we have a passenger that becomes ill? So these are all important points that can be covered in a briefing that changes our pre-departure briefing. We've been speaking for some time, Catherine, I know our time we still got plenty of time, but I would really like to get to some of the questions.
Can I just build on that real quick before we jump in that? And
absolutely, David, absolutely.
Because I think on challenge of small flight departments that it is an added pressure. And I'll give the example, we fly out of an airport, our base airport, and we got in the airplane a couple months ago, and I normally always check NOTAMs and called for clearance, and the tower was closed. They've moved the tower opening time an hour to later. And I had to stop a second and go, how did I miss that? And so when I say it's subtle, the extra pressure can subtly affect your safety. And you have to find a way, either through checklist or through procedures or briefings, to mitigate that affecting the safety operation of your airplane. Or if you don't, you're gonna miss something vital because you're focused, and especially in a small flight where it's so easy to get focused on something that has nothing to do with the operation of the airplane, and then you let something go. And I think that's the challenge that I know we're facing in our department, and I think a lot of small operators probably have the same thing. So I just wanted to add that because you hit it really.
That's a great add. Kate, is there anything you want to add?
No, I guess if we're going to sort of go to questions soon. One thing I did.
Yeah, and
oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Kate. Go ahead.
I reached out to the flight attendant that is on our COVID team and asked her if she had any advice I could share with everyone today on her perspective of being a member on the team. And I thought what she said was really valuable. She said what she took away the most from being a member of this team is use your resources. Avoid making your own guidelines or trying to use your own best practices or figuring it out. There are so many resources out there right now that are offering guidelines that you can take from and decide what works well in your department. So CDC, WHO, MedAir is another great resource. So use those resources and allow them to help you build and come up with all the surprises. You may come up with answers to the surprises that you don't want to come across on the road. They can help you open your eyes up, and of course other flight departments. I'm sure everyone is out there doing the same thing, and if you have resources, use them.
Exactly, and I also want to put a plug in for the NBAA, IBAC. I mean, these are all valuable resources. The world gets small real quick when it comes to networking, and I want a special thank you for the NBAA for reminding us of SAFOs that are out there. And again, for those that operate outside the United States, safety advisories. And I think I saw Doug Carr's name on the list. So Doug, I hope I get this right just for you, but 20009 version 1.2, I believe, or something, deals primarily with the 121 operators. There's a lot of good information in there. But as I remind our flight crews prior to every flight, please have handy and review and know SAFA 20012, what to do in the event of a sudden ATC 0 event. 20011, I believe, has to deal with a oceanic ATC 0 event. But you know what, if the majority of our operations right now are domestic, our crews need to know what's in 20012 and the expectations that the various centers and control towers have on us. It's part of our discussion, again, knowing before we go. So Catherine, let's start reviewing some of your questions. Like I said at the very beginning, I imagine we're going to learn from many of the questions too. So welcome back, Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much. This is fascinating to listen to, even while looking at all the questions that are coming up. And for everybody that has submitted, thank you. You can keep on submitting them. I'm going to jump to the COVID specific questions to start. Since we're hot on this topic right now, and I would invite any of the other panelists and presenters here today to jump on video if you have any additional information. So let me go to, here is the first one. Are there standard or best practices that FBO should be asking crews during the planning stages regarding how to interact with you, your passengers, luggage, and vehicles? I can repeat that if you'd like.
No, I'll take that question. Again, the value and I'll go a little deeper into our pre-departure briefings. Prior to the briefing, again, it has to do with the resources that we have in our department. So we have a scheduling team. Well, David, you're probably your own scheduler, dispatcher, order catering, and everything, person of many hats.
Right.
But our scheduling team will call ahead to the FBO, and there's a series of questions. Is there a reduced services, reduced hour, reduced staff? What are the mask requirements? How are they handling the local mandates? We'll also list for the crew on the briefing form the FBO's company's website, because each FBO has, not only if they're part of a major chain, whether or not if it's Atlantic, Signature, I know I'm going to forget some, please forgive me, whatever chain it may be, they have on some of their major websites their guidelines. Here's what we're doing. That's great information. You can drill deeper to the specific FBO that you're going to, and they will have enhancements to that. Our schedulers will glean out of that information and share with Kate and I everything we need to know before we go, so that when we open that door at our destination, we know what's expected upon us. Again, it goes back to communicating ahead, being clear, being concise, and being consistent with your local handler, whether or not if it's an FBO at Teterboro, or if I'm getting out of the aircraft at Luton or Paris or wherever the destination may be.
I think one thing to remember too, I had a friend of mine experience this. Somebody got sick en route. You don't want them going into the FBO. You need to think through, what are we going to do with this passenger, because the FBO is not going to be wanting them in there. Do they sit out on the ramp? Do they sit in your airplane so you can figure out a transportation? That's part of getting in front of it a little bit, as we talked about. It may not be, obviously not an everyday routine, but it's a possibility they faced. And they wouldn't even let the crew into the FBO.
I was going to ask, what do they do with everyone else who's been on that plane?
They were not allowed in, and I won't tell you what they had to do on the ramp.
What are the questions you got, Catherine?
This one also is from FBO and says, for decades, FBOs have created creature comforts for crews to help them deal with fatigue, amongst other things, but have had to scale some of those things back. Are there other things that we can do, FBOs, to align with COVID restrictions that will help the crews?
I have a few thoughts, but I'd like to hear from David or Kate first.
I can say that I haven't had a lot of experience going in and out of FBOs. A lot of my trips have not left me in that situation. But as Gary mentioned before, a lot of FBOs have websites. Keeping those up to date, that's what can help us tremendously, so that we're aware of what we're coming to. And the little experience that I've had with FBOs have been, sometimes the kitchens are closed, or areas where we might heat up our meals, and that's something can be a huge part of our day. I experienced that in one of my trips lately, and the FBO staff were phenomenal at stepping up, making themselves available, and offering to do those things for us, even though they had shut the kitchen down to avoid cross-contamination in there and exposure. They not only told us that they were available to do it for us, they went out of their way to make themselves available so that we didn't feel like we were annoying them or bothering them to do it. And that was a huge help to me, helping get my pilots and myself ready to go for the rest of our day.
David, what feedback do you have for the FBOs?
I think real clear communication, such as we're so far into this now that we're not emotional when we're told something, just like the rental cars. That should have been communicated up front. Hey, when you rent the car, you cannot leave it on the ramp. So I think the more an FBO can communicate what their needs are or what their requirements are, the easier it's going to be on the crew and on us.
Yeah, one thing that'll be on my tombstone is the saying, communicate, coordinate, remove assumptions. And to the FBOs, Catherine, I would also say, and I experienced seeing this with Kate and our other flight attendants, they felt like they were not living up to our expectations of cabin service when we're talking about a paper or a cardboard box lunch and plasticware. That's not normal. Again, it goes back to operating, the new normal is different. And we reassured everybody that this is what the feedback that we're getting from our major executives. They want to focus again on the safety. And so my advice for the FBO is continue to communicate. Let us know what you're doing, what we have available to us at a destination. And just a quick story. We had a crew depart not too long ago. They had a very long duty day to where they were going to get a day room at a hotel, so to meet our fatigue management guidelines. But as in any destination, you're hit and miss on what options are available when it comes to eating establishments. And so I continually remind the flight attendants, and Kate can verify this, don't be hesitant to order extra catering so that when you get to your destination, you can have dinner on the aircraft or lunch, whatever it may be. Just make sure you have the right coolers and everything's properly stored. So to the FBOs, having access to the coolers, to the making sure that we maintain good food safety, and Kate can talk about that forever, making sure that, you know, we don't contaminate the food. So I hope that answers the question, Catherine.
Okay, well, we'll see if
Can
there's.
can I add one more thing?
Absolutely.
I wish more FBOs would go paperless. It just, to me, somewhat defeats the purpose of the shield and all that when they have to give you the receipt to sign for them to take back. It just, get my email and just email me the receipt and make it paperless. I think it's safe for both parties involved. So.
And the pen
Excellent
too, right?
point.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, thank you guys. I have a question about fatigue, and there's actually two that kind of go together here. As related to SMS and to some extent flight risk management systems, have your operations put in place checks and balances to monitor crews and ground personnel anxiety level facing this new pandemic work environment? And that goes with another where, David, you distinguish between fatigue and being stressed. And so how do you address that? So there we have fatigue and we have stress. How do you guys incorporate this into your planning and your risk assessments?
Two answers. We don't have a fatigue manager. There's two pilots. We are still building some of that information under the flight plan stage 1 process we're in. Other than we discuss it and we talk about it, the stress level is and we have talked about how to manage that, and what we're discovering is creating the tools to help us reduce the stress. So up until a couple of weeks ago, we did not have a checklist for pre-departure COVID checklist. So it was more of, okay, what do we need to ask? What do we need to do? Now we have a tool, now that we can start implementing it, it's going to relieve the stress of wondering what it is I missed, which is what relieves the stress. You know, there's going to be the unknown. You just have to manage that stress. And what I try and watch is to what does the duty day look like, and if it's a lot of moving parts, maybe we need to readjust some of that. This is really how we kind of look at it right now in this environment. Fortunately, we're not. Most of our duty days are pretty short. Go someplace and stay. So we're fortunate in that. But if we had a long day, we would certainly look at managing what that would look like.
Okay.
Gary probably has a much better answer to it.
No, David, what you just described is what we said at the very beginning of our conversation. Programs come and go, principles should never change. The principle meaning, how do you operate an airplane safely as you manage your fatigue management? And my advice to you and every operator, don't sacrifice your fatigue management program because we have additional layers. Those layers should fit into our we should not change the boundaries of fatigue management. If you have a 14-hour duty day or whatever your duty day is, live by it. Don't change that. They're there for a reason. We have to figure out how to mitigate around it or how to implement the new normal. And you talk about creating a checklist. There's many definitions of a checklist. My definition of a checklist is a history of mistakes that we don't want to make again.
Right,
it's that simple. And one thing that I will add that we're doing, because we're a larger operation, if it was you and I, David, we could check in with each other. Hey, how are you doing today? You know, you feeling okay, whatever it may be. With the various management levels that we have in our department, our supervisors have weekly calls with their respective teams. And sometimes those team calls are only 15 minutes with everybody checking in. how are you doing? Kate, you've experienced those. It's just a simple checklist, letting them know that we care about them, communicate any changes that may have happened since the last call, and let them know that the company's still here, since we're all working from home unless we have a trip. So that's one thing how we've helped, I feel helps the stress, Kate, from line flight attendant position and from the other, and from your group. Does that help?
Yes, yeah, no, that's spot on. I'm sorry, it cut out a little bit. Did you ask if that was my experience from my end? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the checking in one-on-ones, I think we try to do them about monthly. That's huge. And knowing your resources, I know being a larger operation, and not all operations will be the same, but some companies do offer resources to help during stressful times, you know, employee assistant programs. So reminding, if you do have other people in your crew or in your department, this is a good resource to use. And as well as America, they have a lot of resources that are free or available for us right now, because it's beyond just us. It's everyone in America is dealing with change. So encouraging people to speak up when they're having a hard time, or just the stress is getting too much, or fatigue does kick in, that there is no shame in that, and encouraging to speak up is huge. And that it's easier said than done, but the more that we speak and share and allow our employees to feel comfortable to speak up when they're not feeling safe to do their duties, is you're creating a safer environment overall.
Yeah,
I know one
so
of
Catherine,
the changes, one of the changes we made is, as a small department, we will we both of the pilots have a little bit of drive to get to the airport where we're based. And so we've moved to positioning the night before to a hotel by the airport to get a good night's rest, to be ready to go the next day. And we've made that change kind of, I realized we were doing it, but it's a good reason to do it. And I said, our company's actually encouraged it to help overall manage the stress and the fatigue, so that doesn't add to even more fatigue. So we'll both reposition in the night before, get a good night's rest, get up and be ready to go without the distractions of home and all the things that go in, and then driving and all of that. So we've been doing more of that. It's okay. We've implemented that since COVID, so it seems to be working better.
Right.
No, that is a great point, Catherine. To wrap up this question, I would add two things: continuous communication, and listen to the feedback. Be a resource for your employees as far as how they're feeling. So again, continuous communication and listen.
As emphasized by the puppy. There are several questions here. Thank you for that ask, do you guys do passenger and crew temperature pre-checks, or how do you test your crews? And then also a follow-on to that is, do you implement a bubble concept to your staff and crew to ensure all of them are free from COVID?
Kate, you want to take that one?
That's a great question, and one that obviously is very hard. And as we know, each state, each city is all taking different approaches. Every country is taking a different approach to that bubble effect. So I can speak for at work. Again, working under a large operation, we had company guidelines be passed down to us. So that kind of fixed our problem of what to create. We followed their guidelines, and it essentially is a check-in that each crew does individually every day that we're operating. And this was all set up by our company. So we just check in, but we've decided that it is the pilot and command's responsibility to make sure that everyone has checked in. And it's a series of questions that we all answer. And I don't know what happens if you say no, knock on wood, I haven't had to yet, or yes to any of them, sorry. But that way we're all just taking accountability for ourselves. We all respect and trust each other. So that's the approach we've taken. If we do have our employees all across our company do take this test or this check-in. So when we have passengers arrive at our home base, we just check that they do have the assessment complete and passed, call it a green card. And when we're on the road, the same thing, they'll do that check-in. If we have passengers that are not employees, we do have this series of questions written out and accessible to us to ask them the same questions. And essentially, if they're all answered no, then we've assigned them a green card. So that's the approach that we've taken from our company guidelines, which has aided us quite a bit, that we didn't have to come up with it ourselves. Smaller operations will have to come up with something, but this is really effective in the sense that it keeps everyone accountable and checked in and didn't forget, you know, or have lost sight of it. And the green card, the sort of, or way of sharing with each other, is a way to just keep accountable, takes away the guessing game of your other crew members, and it kind of just exposes everyone doing their part with, and it still keeps it private. Asking, I know when I've asked passengers coming on board, I choose to do it quietly with each member so that the questions aren't extremely vulnerable, but they are personal, but they do expose personal things about if they've traveled or of course signs and symptoms. So just being respectful that everyone has their own boundaries of what they'd like to share with everyone else. So just keep that in mind if you do come up with a series of questions or some sort of screening process, that some questions can be more personal. So just make sure that you are respectful when asking them. In terms of the outside bubble, again, where we're located, that's not something that's in place. So the state has not mandated that here. We have been, again, just guided by our company guidelines that we will have to, any quarantine rules of certain countries and states that are mandated, and then that's on us as an employee to report and then to deal with the effects of that. Gary, I don't know if you have any other feedback from above of the outside bubble, and I think we have had some COVID tests done for certain areas we go to, but you're probably more aware of that than I am.
Yeah, they're very, very limited. I mean, basically, if we pass those 5 questions, we do carry thermal thermometers, infrared thermometers on the flight. Crews have access to them. So if you're on a 2, 3, 4 day trip, if you need to check your temperature, you can do that, or somebody can check it for you. So David, do you anything you want to add?
Yeah, as a small department, once again, our management team is small, so they all know each other. So they're pretty self-regulatory. So we do not do any kind of temperature check. We had the crew, both the other pilot and I, got tested 2 or 3 weeks in a row just to make sure that we did not have it. And he actually tested positive in one test, which created a whole mess until he got tested negative. So we think it was a false positive, but it created a lot of ripples down the pipe. Until we could show that he was definitely negative. But as far as the passengers know, we have talked to them and asked them, but they're, like I said, they all know each other. They all work really close in the office together, and so they self-regulate. They did have to, when we thought that he tested positive, the passengers that were on board all self-quarantined until they went and got tested, and everybody was negative. So that was kind of our procedure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, again, the value of knowing your audience and driving consistency for that audience. I know it's a very broad answer, Catherine, but you got to consider your audience and by which you're operating under. So what other questions do you have?
Okay. This one goes to the handouts. I think the question is, how are Gary and David keeping up with all the COVID-19 requirements, closures, orders, etc. to places they fly? Is a third party utilized to gather information or done in-house? And I want to point out that we have uploaded 2 handouts that you can find in your control panel to download. And maybe you guys would like to just address some of the things you've done to cover all of that.
On our checklist, there are some websites that you can go to. NBAA has a really vibrant state-by-state web page that keeps up with the latest. The regional directors update that information. I have found, and within our department, we're finding the FBOs after dealing with this since the first of the year, they're much more tuned into and know what information to gather. And I've found them to be really the best source for information to call and have a conversation with them. It at least get you the answers that you need, and then if you need to dig some more. Our issue was, like I said, we're going to the Bahamas. Went on their website, we talked to them, go on this website, you have to get tested, you have to get this health visa. Tried to get it, we couldn't get it. Can we come? Can we not come? Finally, if you've been to the Bahamas, sometimes it's a little lax, and they said, just come, stay on the airplane, you're good. Okay, here we come, and we had no issues. I mean, it was but it added to the stress. I didn't want to get in there and they say, well, sorry, you have to go home.
No, that's a great question. How do we collect this information? Obviously, our resources, we have a few more resources than in David's group. So we do have dedicated schedulers that are collecting this information. Regardless, it's and I'll go back to being consistent and finding what works best for you. I know it's a very vague answer, but finding what works best for you, being consistent in your research from one trip to the other, so that you can have a conversation that focuses on the facts that you collected. It removes the emotion of, well, I didn't know, but here's my sources. And let's face it, it's going to be a learning process. It's going to be a learning process. But the state, you got to look at websites that the state produces. The state, the county, the city, for example, going to Alaska, dealing with trips that go in and out of Alaska. You look at this Alaska mandate section, I'm going off the top of my head, 2 through 6 is how you would enter the state unless you're an exempt or you're part of the infrastructure, and then you follow the mandates under 7. Now again, so now that I would encourage you to check with a legal source. If you have that resource available to you, you may have to outsource that question, but make sure that you can have an educated conversation of where you're going and be consistent in your research, and you will quickly develop a pattern and a consistency. But state, city, county, just do a quick search for your destination. You'll have a lot of links available to you.
That's great. And the sample checklists that we've uploaded from you guys have a lot of that information to follow, and so adapt it to your needs. I do have a couple of questions, and I think this is a good one. You guys have obviously started flying again. I mean, everybody stood down for a long time, and then you have started to fly again, but not every operator is flying at any kind of level that they used to. So there may be a low demand of flights, and they're talking about, in order to keep our handling proficiency, they're scheduling PICs every 45 days to fly, and then looking at the regulations, obviously. But the question really is, what is your perspective on keeping your flight crews proficient in a time when you're maybe standing back up? How did you guys address that as you came back into flying?
David, you want to go first? And Kate, we'll jump over to what the flight attendants are doing as well.
Yeah, small departments get hit by this, particularly because a lot of them haven't flown since March. And a couple recommendations came up, which I thought were excellent. Do a cockpit trip. Just every couple of weeks, go sit in the cockpit and go through your flows, touch the switches, do your procedures, so it feels comfortable when you actually do go flying again. Start it up, taxi it around, if you want to kind of get into the thought process of flying. It's amazing how quickly that can go away in a short period of time, where you get back in the cockpit and you go, okay, what was that procedure again? How did we set this up? So it's really good to refresh, and if you can, get with your other pilot and do it as a crew. That keeps it refreshed. I know some of the crews every 30 days we're flying the airplane. It depends if you've stored your airplane under a maintenance storage program and you cannot fly it, then that's not an option. If you've not stored it, you should be flying it somewhat, at least every 30 days. The manufacturer will tell you. So make sure you check with that. So that adds a little bit of familiarity back into the cockpit versus just cold calling it, and then at the end of 90 days you're going to try and go fly again. So.
No, that's a great point. And David, I would add one thing to that. We do something very similar. Maintenance lets us know when we need to do engine runs. Before, maintenance was doing it, but then we incorporated this idea of these flight deck trips. During the engine runs, the crews will have a trip, and they'll even have let's call it an MEL scenario that will cause. Here's your MEL situation, the message that you have, or equipment failure. How do you resolve it? Can you dispatch? To keep us in the loop with maintenance, the MEL process that as well. Not only just pushing the buttons on the flight deck, but incorporating our recovery process as well. Kate, what are flight attendants doing during this time?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So when we're not flying as much and getting used to being at home, which is new, it's a great time to better yourself and sharpen your skills. So our department, very fortunately, was able to put all of our flight attendants and some pilots as well who decided to take it to study to become EMRs and EMTs to better our medical skills in the aircraft and in life. So very fortunate. This was a great time to have that time, the downtime, as we like to call it, to study and learn a new skill to ultimately make us better flight attendants and better teammates. I've also challenged some of the girls to take this time to review our SOPs, FOMs. It's a great time to take. Now we have that spare time to fill it with reviewing just what we need to review, what we already know, and just sharpen our skills right in front of us. Reviewing all of our safety processes that we have in place and that we practice a lot. We hold ourselves to quite a high standard in our department, but making sure you're staying sharp when you're not on the aircraft is important. And I think, like David said, you can wait till the minute where you can get involved and stay on it before you need to. So even though it's an adjustment to be home and not flying, there's a lot that we can do behind the scenes to better ourselves and to stay sharp.
Great, thank you. We have time for a couple more questions. One that came up in this is flying. This particular person or operation has a G650, G550, and they said if someone gets ill, they move them into the crew room with the door closed to be able to separate them. What are your procedures if someone gets ill during a flight? Or your plan?
That's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great question. We with a Falcon and a Gulfstream in our operation, and I'm on both of the aircraft. Again, I said earlier, brief the flight attendant about outflow valves and where they're at. In the Gulfstream, you would move somebody that has become ill up into the crew rest area up front because that's where the outflow valve is. And in Falcon, you would, if possible, you'd move them towards the aft cabin portion. It's closest to the outflow valve. So yes, we do the same thing. Know your airplane and communicate it with the cabin crew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well done.
Great. David, any thoughts?
Well, no, I mean, we obviously operate a smaller airplane and the outflow valve is in the back. So we would move them towards the back. The only issue that once again, you have to know your airplane. There's a HEPA filter there for a recirculation fan that recirculates it back into the cabin. So you have to think, oh, well, let me turn that recirc fan off. because we don't want to be, hopefully the HEPA filter would capture the germs, but why risk it, so that may be added to the procedure, turn that recirc fan off.
Absolutely.
And then we'll go back.
Yeah,
Gary.
Catherine, one thing I would also add too is, not to get too far off from the question, but we created an executive summary, a one-page summary for the executives about very brief, high level, here's what we're doing. One of the things that we address on the executive summary is the cabin refresh rate of our various aircraft. Depending upon the make and model, some aircraft, it was reassuring to the executives that the cabin air was refreshed every 2.5 minutes. And we reminded them that the air that's coming in that they breathe, we're pulling it off the engines, and those things burn any impurities that are in the air. And that little bit of knowledge, or sharing that knowledge of our airplane systems, it's like they just sat back in the chair and go, oh, that's good to know. What's for dinner?
All right. Which also brings me to, how do your leaders, your CEO, step in to ensure that the morale of all employees stand by? Let's see that the morale of all employees are still up despite the pandemic and business situation. Do you have that from above in your organizations?
We do. I'll give a very vague answer. They hire the right people to run the departments, and they make sure that we have the right resources, communication, not only within the department, but communication from the very top to whatever position the employee's in. Weekly conversations, checking in on your teams on a regular basis, and listening to the feedback. That's not just within our department. That should be part of the company culture.
And I think the benefit of a small company is we do know each other. We are intimately French, and so they do check. I know the other pilot and I probably at least daily text each other, how you doing, what's going on, what are your kids up to. So and the owner, the principal, has set that policy. It's a team. You can see it throughout the company, and it's not, it's multi. So everybody, and the other thing is that I'm responsible for our department, so nobody's questioning the decisions that we're making, as long as they feel that they're in the best interest of the department and safety. Yep. So that all feeds into just a great culture.
Mm-hmm.
Bringing up the culture of an organization, any advice on the balancing act of safety in this COVID world and company costs? How has that balance gone for you guys?
David, you want to go first?
Sure. And we're dealing. Yeah, only because we made the choice to go down the flight plan stage 1 process, and there's a cost, and I tell small flight departments as an NBA committee member that safety has a cost, and not every safety system is appropriate for every flight department. So you need to evaluate just because you institute a system doesn't make you safe. It really starts with your DNA, and what Dr. Tony Kern says, are you a professional or are you not? And if you are, you need to act like one. There are steps and things and procedures that stand you out amongst other professionals, and you need to really embrace that. And if you have that attitude, you're going to adopt the safety systems that are going to make you safe, whether it's in COVID or outside of COVID. And that's really holding the mirror up to say, where are we as a department? Where am I as a professional?
Great, thank you.
And Catherine, I would add to that. I mean, just as I encourage us to have continuous conversations with our direct reports, with pilots, flight attendants, maintenance. I have monthly conversations with the budget team, and they brief me on where we're at, Are we ahead or behind in some categories? What is the company asking us to do? But the important thing is that we try and tell our story here. We're saving this money in this area, because let's face it, if we're not flying much, our travel costs and our fuel cost is down. Not that we go spend the money someplace else, but again, it's knowing the entire department, what's going on, and continually looking at the best forecast for year end, so that when executives do come in or they do ask us, what are we doing? How are we can quickly tell our story and say, here's where we're at. Nothing has changed. If nothing, let me back up. The only thing that has changed is being asked the question, what do you need? And sometimes they'll move mountains to get it. It's just having that communication with, and it comes down to being responsible, being accountable, having the open dialogue with the management team that we report to. What do we need? Can we self-finance it within our budget? Is it something that we need help with? Whatever it may be. Again, it's a pretty loaded question, but I think it's a great question. And in our culture, it's knowing where we're at with the budget. Is this something that we can self-finance? Is it something that, because we're way under burning our fuel, way under our RONs for the year, that cost was baked into the budget. That money's not ours to spend. So before we spend it, if we can build a good business case on, may we take this money and utilize it here, like decontaminating the interior of the aircraft on a yearly basis at X amount of dollars, having the right kind of first aid kits and equipment on board, these types of things.
Great, thank you.
I can also, it's not so much about budget, but just on the same topic there, it kind of triggered my brain there. Another aspect to consider, especially if you're in a larger flight department or a lot of people passing through, is allocating something we learned and we decided to do, is to allocate one person to be responsible for watching the stock of additional PPE that you might need now. We are going through it faster than we ever have before, as simple as gloves, rubber gloves, or we all have them on board, but we're using them probably 4 times faster than we ever have. So having somebody to keep an eye on that is something to consider, and it has saved us considerable amount of times and probably situations where we would have been short. And we also have to keep in mind that right now, a lot of these items are hard to get and may take some time. So having somebody to focus on that can alleviate some stress or stressful situations that could occur leaving or going on the road and not being prepared.
That's great. Thank you, guys. We're getting to the end of our 2 hours. This has flown by. You all are amazing. And I would, before I wrap this up, I just want to sort of leave it open to you if you have any more comments or thoughts about going forward. We're moving into the winter season. What happens if there's a vaccine? Just do you carry on with what you've been doing, or any thoughts or advice as we look ahead to the coming 6 to 12 months?
I think we just take it as it's going. We try and plan, but I think we're just going to be open to what the future holds.
Right.
Like I say, we're fortunate in that we're not having outside people, so we're a pretty controlled environment with the people that are on our airplane. So I think that helps our situation.
Yeah.
Well, if anybody can predict the future, I'd like to know what you're drinking and eating, because who would have predicted this? Okay.
Right.
Yeah, it's all you can do is monitor the situation like we do on any trip, know as much as we can before we go, have contingencies in place, and be prepared for the unexpected. That's part of the IS-BAO and IS-BAO program.
That's great. Being resilient and planning and learning as you go. You guys have really presented the case for that, and we very much appreciate it. We are at the end of our time. I want to thank everybody for being here. We really appreciate you sticking around and putting in all these fantastic questions. I've got a slide up that has the emails for all of these fabulous presenters, and you should be able to find all of the IBAC team on our website at ibac.org. I have my email up here as well if you want me to forward anything for you. So thank you all in advance for your feedback on this. You will be getting a survey at the end. We are all on the quest for continuous improvement, right? That's what this is all about, learning from each other and sharing lessons learned. We're going to continue with this roundtable series. The plan is to have our next one in October and then again in early 2021. We will be focusing on hot topics just like this. And if you need any more information, we didn't really talk about any of the updates, feel free to just email me and we will answer any other questions you might have. So again, I want to thank Gary, Kate, and David so much for joining us, and the effort that you put into this is fantastic information. And thanks to the IBAC team for the updates that you gave earlier, Andy, Kurt, Ben, and Terry. And with that, I'm looking forward to seeing you all next time, and just so grateful for all of your experience and insights today. Thank you so much for that.
Awesome. Thank you for having us, Catherine.
Thank you, Catherine.
Yep.
All right.
Take care, everybody. Have a great day. Stay safe.